The red wine hit me before the laughter stopped. Sharp, cold, blooming across my dress like a wound. The room went silent, every pair of eyes catching the light, waiting to see what I'd do. The music kept playing, but it sounded far away, muffled under the weight of humiliation. If you've ever trusted someone only to watch them turn on you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I promise, you're not alone. The smell of Merlot still clung to my skin as I stood there, frozen between dignity and disbelief, realizing that kindness had made me blind. That was the night my life, and everything I thought I knew about family began to unravel. I can still feel the sting of it, the cold, sticky trail of red wine sliding down the front of my pale blue dress. It wasn't just a spill, it was deliberate. For a moment, the whole room froze. Music faded, laughter died midair, and every pair of eyes turned toward me. The birthday candles behind me flickered, their light catching the deep scarlet stain blooming across the fabric, spreading like an accusation. I remember my breath catching, not from the shock of the liquid, but from the silence that followed. You could hear the clink of a fork dropped somewhere near the dessert table. My son, Ethan, stood motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between me and her. Lila, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had just humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. For a split second, I thought it had to be an accident. Maybe her hand slipped. Maybe she was nervous. But then I saw her expression. Calm, almost satisfied. The kind of look that told me this moment had been planned, rehearsed, and executed perfectly. I could taste the metallic bitterness of embarrassment on my tongue as people whispered. Someone awkwardly tried to laugh it off, but the air in that room was heavy, suffocating. I didn't scream. I didn't storm out. I simply stood there, feeling the wine seep into my skin, my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. My mind raced, but my body refused to move. I had spent years trying to build peace, to create harmony for my son's family, and here I was, turned into a spectacle on my own birthday. In that silence, I felt something shift inside me, a sharp, cold clarity. I knew then that this wasn't just about spilled wine or pride. This was about power, about control, and she had just declared war, right there, in front of everyone, as I turned slowly toward her. The edges of my shame hardened into something else, something quiet, calculating. She smiled faintly, as if she'd already won, but she had no idea what she had just awakened. Word count 300. 3 weeks before that night, everything seemed peaceful, or at least I told myself it was. My mornings were quiet, spent in the soft hum of the old house my late husband, David, and I had built together. The scent of coffee, the rustle of the newspaper. They used to mean comfort. Now, they mostly reminded me of absence. Losing him left a silence that no music or conversation could fill. And I think that's why I clung so tightly to the idea of family. Ethan was my only child, my pride, my constant reason to keep moving forward after David passed. When he married Lila 2 years ago, I was genuinely happy. She was lively, confident, the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking in. I remember thinking, maybe she's exactly what our family needs. Someone who brings life back into the walls of this house. I wanted to believe she loved Ethan the way I did. Not long after their wedding, they started struggling. Rent, jobs, the usual storms that hit young couples. I still had savings, and the house was far too big for one person. It felt natural, even right, to offer it to them. I told myself I was simply helping them build a future. I moved into the smaller guest house out back, happy to hear footsteps again in the main hallway, laughter from the kitchen. It made me feel like life had come back. I gave more than space, though. I helped with bills, loaned money I never asked back. When Lila said she wanted to start a business, I wrote the check without hesitation. I thought it was love in action, the kind of selflessness David would have been proud of. But slowly, I started noticing small things that didn't sit right. A sharp tone in her voice when she spoke to Ethan. The way she'd take over conversations when I was trying to tell a story. Little dismissive gestures, a sigh, a smirk, that made me feel like I was intruding in my own home. Ethan, sweet as he was, always brushed it off. He'd tell me I was imagining things, that Lila was just stressed or tired, and I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Looking back, I think I confused gratitude with acceptance. I let her take control because it felt easier than facing the truth. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was love. Or maybe I just couldn't bear the thought that I'd built my life around people who didn't truly want me there. When you love your child, you don't see warning signs. You see what you want to believe. The morning of the party felt like stepping into someone else's life, one I had built, but no longer belonged to. I spent hours choosing a dress that felt appropriate, not too flashy, not too plain. I told myself it was just a small gathering, a quiet evening with family and friends, a birthday surrounded by love. That's all I wanted. But beneath that hope, there was something else. A dull ache in my chest. A whisper that said, "Don't expect too much this time." When I arrived, the house looked beautiful. My old home, the one I had given them, was glowing with candles and laughter. Music floated softly from the living room, and people were mingling near the buffet table. But as I stepped inside, the warmth I expected didn't follow. Instead, there was a strange stiffness in the air, a politeness that felt rehearsed. Lila greeted me first. Her smile was practiced, perfect on the surface, but empty behind the eyes. She wrapped her arms around me briefly, careful not to wrinkle her dress. I remember noticing her perfume, sharp, expensive, almost aggressive. Ethan appeared moments later, distracted, his phone in hand, murmuring about some last-minute errands. I told myself he was just busy, that he'd relax once things settled. The guests were mostly her friends, not mine. I recognized a few faces, people I'd met in passing but never really known. Their laughter sounded thin, their compliments about the house and the food almost like echoes. Every interaction carried an undertone I couldn't quite name, like everyone knew something I didn't. I tried to focus on gratitude, on the idea that this was still my family, my son, my daughter-in-law, that maybe this tension was all in my head. But the feeling grew heavier with each passing moment. Lila's eyes followed me, always smiling, always watching, and Ethan avoided my gaze, as if he couldn't quite face me. At one point, I caught my reflection in the window, standing there among people who looked happy but felt distant. I forced a smile, lifted my glass, and tried to join the laughter. But even the music seemed to falter for a second. like the house itself was holding its breath. And in that stillness, just before everything shattered, I remember thinking, something's about to happen. I could feel it, pulsing in the air like a warning I didn't yet understand. The night was perfect, at least for a moment. The lights were soft and golden, the music low and steady. I remember standing near the dining table, surrounded by people who smiled just enough to look friendly, but never quite reached my eyes. Someone called for a toast, and I laughed. Really laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. I thought, maybe this is what peace feels like again. Ethan raised his glass, but before he could speak, I felt Lila's hand brush past me. It was quick, almost graceful. Then came the sound, the sharp clink of glass, followed by the cold splash against my skin. The wine, deep red and heavy, hit my chest first, then spread, soaking into the pale blue of my dress. For a second, I didn't even process it. I just stood there, frozen. The smell of it hit next, sharp, sweet, acidic, filling my nose, my throat, my entire body. The room went silent, completely silent. You could feel the tension hanging like smoke in the air. I could hear someone stifling a gasp, someone else whispering. My mind tried to tell me it was an accident, that she didn't mean it. But the look on Lila's face, that tiny, perfect smirk hiding behind fake concern, told me otherwise. It was deliberate, calculated. Ethan didn't move. His eyes darted away, landing somewhere near the floor. His silence louder than any defense could have been. The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do, their discomfort washing over me like waves of pity I never wanted. I felt the weight of their eyes, judgment, confusion, amusement, maybe even relief that it wasn't them. My hands trembled, the cold fabric clinging to me like shame. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the distance, the buzz of the lights overhead. Everything slowed down, every sound exaggerated, every second stretched into an eternity. In that frozen moment, something inside me cracked, not loudly, not with fury, but quietly, cleanly, like glass splitting under pressure. I realized this wasn't about spilled wine or even humiliation. It was about power. I had given everything, my home, my money, my kindness, and in return, she had taken my dignity in front of everyone I loved. But as I stood there, drenched and shaking, another feeling crept in, small but steady. It wasn't anger yet. It was awareness, a pulse of strength that had been buried under years of silence and compromise. I didn't know what I would do next. I just knew one thing: I would never let her see me broken again. That was the night I remembered who I used to be. I locked myself in the downstairs bathroom, the only place in that house where silence still belonged to me. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sound echoed in my chest like a heartbeat I hadn't heard in years. I stood in front of the mirror, the harsh light exposing every streak of wine across my dress, every line on my face I had tried not to notice. My hands were shaking. The smell of the wine clung to me, sharp, sour, humiliating. I could still hear faint laughter outside, muffled through the walls. They were moving on, pretending nothing happened. For a moment, I wanted to cry, to crumble, to let the pain swallow me whole. But when I looked up at my reflection, something stopped me. The woman staring back looked small, but not weak, just forgotten. I realized I had been living that way for years, giving until there was nothing left, apologizing for existing in spaces I built with my own hands. I had mistaken silence for peace, patience for love. I grabbed a towel and began to blot the stain, slow and steady, watching the red fade into pale pink. The motion became something else, almost ritual, almost cleansing. Each press of the towel felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had given away too easily. The shaking in my hands eased. My breath steadied. It hit me then. This wasn't just about Lila. This was about every time I'd chosen kindness over self-respect. Every time I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But standing there, in that small, echoing room, I finally understood that the fight was all I had left. If she wanted a war, she'd just declared it. The morning after the party felt heavier than any storm I'd ever lived through. The air in the house was thick with silence, the kind that follows something unforgivable. I woke early, long before the sun had risen, and just sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee. My dress from the night before hung on the chair beside me, the faint stain still visible under the light. Every time I looked at it, I felt that same sting in my chest, not just from the humiliation, but from the betrayal that had made it possible. He came around 9. I remember the sound of his car pulling into the driveway, the quiet shuffle of his shoes at the door. He brought flowers, pale lilies, the kind I used to keep on the windowsill when he was a boy. He couldn't even look at me when he handed them over. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice soft and unsure, saying all the things people say when they don't really mean them. I listened, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the same woman who used to rush to comfort him, to tell him everything was fine, because it wasn't, and we both knew it. As he sat there, I started to see things more clearly than I ever had. The exhaustion in his face wasn't just guilt, it was dependence. I thought of the years I had spent making sure he and Lila never struggled. The checks I'd written without question, the accounts I'd drained when they said they needed help. Rent, repairs, vacations, investments. It added up quietly, piece by piece, until the number came to me like a slap. $47,000. But it wasn't the money that broke me. It was realizing how small my love had become in his eyes, something measured, spent, and forgotten. He spoke about pressure, about responsibility, about how hard things had been for them. I heard the words, but underneath them was something colder, excuses wrapped in self-pity. For years, I had shielded him from consequences, thinking that's what mothers did. But sitting there, watching him fumble with his coffee cup, unable to face me, I saw the truth. I hadn't protected him. I had weakened him. My silence had cost both of us too much. He left not long after, saying he'd call later. I didn't believe him. When the door shut behind him, I looked around the house, my old house, and felt an emptiness I couldn't ignore. The walls that once felt alive now pulsed with distance and deceit. That was the morning I stopped asking why and started asking how. How deep had this gone? How much had I missed? And most of all, how could I let it continue if love couldn't open his eyes? Maybe truth would. Something changed in me after Ethan left that morning. The silence that once felt heavy now felt useful, like a blank page waiting to be written on. I had spent years reacting to life, letting things happen to me. But now, I was watching, learning, calculating. I wasn't crying anymore. I was observing. I started at my husband's old desk, the one tucked away in the study. It still smelled faintly of cedar and ink, a scent that used to make me feel safe. I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and typed Lila's full name into the search bar. The first results were harmless: social media posts, pictures of brunches and vacations, smiling captions about gratitude and love. But I knew better now. I scrolled deeper. The truth always hides beneath the polish. By noon, I had found the first ex-husband, a real estate agent from Denver, divorced 6 years ago. He had filed for bankruptcy the same year. There was a small local news clipping, unpaid debts, a foreclosure. The second man came next, a contractor from Ohio. His story was eerily similar. Married for 3 years, then financial collapse, followed by a quiet settlement, buried in an old forum post. I found something else, a complaint alleging coercion and manipulation in joint accounts. It wasn't proven, but I didn't need proof. The pattern was enough. As I read, something steady and cold built inside me. Not rage, not sorrow, but clarity. Every lie she told me had structure, purpose. The tears, the charm, the way she made Ethan feel responsible for her moods. It was all part of the same choreography she'd used before. I wasn't the first. I had just been the easiest. I kept a notebook beside me, jotting down dates, names, and connections. Every detail became a piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Between each search, I paused, not to doubt myself, but to breathe, to remind myself why this mattered. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it to remember who I was before they convinced me to be small. As the afternoon light shifted through the blinds, I noticed my reflection in the computer screen. Focused, calm, unrecognizable in the best way. For the first time, I wasn't thinking like a mother or a victim. I was thinking like someone taking back her life. By dinner time, I didn't just know who Lila was. I knew what she was, and she wasn't family. She was a parasite. Patricia's house looked like a magazine cover. Perfectly trimmed hedges, spotless windows, not a blade of grass out of place. Even the air smelled curated, like roses and disinfectant. I remember thinking how fitting it was. Beauty that didn't breathe. Elegance that didn't feel alive. When she opened the door, her smile was as practiced as her pearls. She greeted me like an old friend, her voice soft and gracious, the kind of tone that said, "I'm in control here." I sat in her living room, surrounded by framed family portraits. Lila as a child, Lila graduating, Lila smiling next to men who were no longer in her life. Patricia poured tea with surgical precision. Every movement was a performance. I almost admired it. Almost. I let her talk first, watching the way her eyes measured me between polite phrases. She thought I was here to make peace, to beg for understanding. But that wasn't why I'd come. I'd come for the truth, and I already had it. When I began to speak, I kept my tone calm, almost conversational. I mentioned Denver first, then Ohio. Names, dates, settlements. I watched her hand pause midair, the teapot hovering just long enough for one drop to spill. She quickly set it down, adjusted a napkin, and smiled again, thinner this time, brittle at the edges. She said her daughter had endured so much. I said her daughter had caused it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth has a sound all its own. Quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. Patricia's charm began to fade. Her words became clipped, defensive. Her mask slipped just enough for me to glimpse the woman who had taught Lila how to weaponize grace. And in that moment, I understood everything. Monsters aren't born. They're raised with perfect manners and expensive china. When I stood to leave, she didn't follow me to the door. I walked out into the crisp afternoon light, feeling neither victory nor rage, only clarity. I didn't need her approval or Lila's downfall. I had something better. I had the truth, and I was finally free of their games. It began quietly, not with shouting, but with whispers. People started asking small questions, ones Lila couldn't control. A neighbor mentioned something she shouldn't have known. A friend hesitated before accepting another story. Lies unravel the same way fabric does, one loose thread at a time, and Lila was pulling at all of them, desperate to keep her perfect world from coming apart. Ethan was the first to falter. I could see it in his eyes when he came by. The confusion, the unease. He started remembering things that didn't add up. A missing deposit. A conversation that suddenly made sense in hindsight. I didn't need to say a word. Silence, I learned, was more powerful than any accusation. It forced the truth to echo louder. Lila, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking. Her laughter became too sharp, her explanations too rehearsed. She watched me the way a cornered animal watches the door, every movement, every pause. I stayed calm, polite, unbothered. I had already fought my battle. She was just realizing hers had begun. Then came the day Ethan looked at her differently, not with anger, but with recognition. He finally saw the cracks I had spent years pretending not to see. And that was when Lila started to crumble. Her control wasn't gone overnight, but it was dying, piece by piece, a slow collapse of charm, deceit, and fear. For the first time, I saw her afraid of losing something she couldn't manipulate. I thought the lies were done. I was wrong. They were only getting darker. That night, the air felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. I remember sitting by the window, the hum of the refrigerator in the distance, the kind of quiet that makes you uneasy. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't name it yet. The moonlight fell across the yard, pale and cold, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow move near the edge of the fence. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I already knew. The first thing I noticed was the smell, faint at first, like someone burning leaves too close to home. Then came the sound, soft, but growing, the crackle of wood surrendering to heat. When I stepped outside, the world had already turned orange. Flames danced along the side of the old storage shed, the one that still held my husband's tools, photo albums, fragments of the life I thought I'd preserved. The fire grew fast, greedy, alive. I could feel the heat against my face, hear the wood groan as if mourning. Neighbors began to shout, lights flickering on one by one, and soon the street filled with people. Amid the chaos, I saw her, Lila, standing across the road, her eyes reflecting the firelight, vacant, hollow, unblinking, not running, not crying, just watching her own destruction. The sirens came, red and blue slicing through the smoke. Police, firemen, questions. None of it mattered in that moment. I wasn't afraid anymore. I just stood there, watching everything she tried to control turn to ash. The shed collapsed inward, sparks rising into the night sky like tiny souls escaping. Somewhere inside, I felt something uncoil, a strange, heavy peace. People talk about justice like it's clean, like it wears a badge or signs a report. But justice is older than that. It's elemental. It doesn't ask permission. Sometimes it comes in whispers, and sometimes it burns. When the fire finally died and the crowd thinned, I was left standing in the smell of smoke and rain. The memories were gone, the proof destroyed, but I didn't feel loss. What burned that night wasn't just wood. It was the last trace of who I used to be under her shadow. As the embers faded to black, I felt the silence return, not hollow this time, but honest. For the first time in years, I was free. In the weeks after the fire, the world slowed down. The scent of smoke lingered longer than I expected. Faint, ghostly, like a memory that refused to leave. I found myself walking through the garden every morning, tracing the edges of the charred soil where the shed once stood. Tiny green shoots had already begun to push through the blackened ground. Life, I realized, doesn't ask for permission to return. It just does. The days became quieter, but not empty. I learned to fill them differently, with small rituals that steadied me. Morning tea by the window, soft music in the background, the hum of the washing machine. There was no grand epiphany, no dramatic moment of closure. Healing came like the dawn, slow, gentle, and always a little different each day. Sometimes, I still thought about Ethan, about the boy I raised, the man I couldn't protect from his own choices. But even that ache softened. We spoke occasionally, carefully, like people learning a new language. I didn't expect forgiveness or understanding. I only wanted honesty. That was enough. As for Lila, her shadow no longer reached me. I stopped asking why people like her exist. Some lessons aren't meant to explain the world, only to remind us who we are when it burns down around us. I had lost things I once thought defined me. My home, my certainty, my family as I knew it. But what remained was stronger. My voice, my boundaries, my peace. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without the pain. It's being able to look at the ashes and see proof that you survived. Now, when I stand in that garden and feel the sun warming my face, I don't think about revenge or loss. I think about how far I've come from the woman who once believed silence was love. I think about how the fire took what was false and left what was real. If you've ever walked through something that tried to break you, maybe you understand. Maybe you know that peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It just settles in, quietly, when you're ready to welcome it. And when it does, don't turn away. Let it stay.